The penthouse on the 60th floor of One Penn glittered like a diamond in Manhattan's skyline, its floor-to-ceiling windows framing the city's restless pulse. Crystal chandeliers cast prisms across sleek marble floors, and the air buzzed with the clink of champagne flutes and the low hum of self-important chatter. It was 2025, and Charles Harrington, real estate tycoon and self-proclaimed king of New York's skyline, was hosting his annual cocktail party for the city's elite, hedge fund managers, tech moguls, and socialites draped in designer threads that cost more than most people's rent. In the midst of this polished chaos stood Maya Johnson, 13 years old, balancing a silver tray of shrimp canapes with the kind of steady hands you'd expect from someone twice her age. Her mother, Lena, darted between the kitchen and the crowd, her black uniform blending into the background like she was part of the furniture. Maya felt the weight of eyes on her, not curious, not kind, but the kind that sized you up and found you wanting. She knew that look. It was the one that followed her and Lena everywhere in this world of wealth they didn't belong to. Charles lounged on a velvet sofa, his $3,000 suit slightly rumpled from too much whiskey, his voice booming over the jazz quartet he'd hired to set the mood. He was mid-story about his latest skyscraper deal when his 16-year-old daughter Elise sprawled across a nearby armchair, interrupted with a smirk. "Daddy, why don't we get some real entertainment? This band's putting me to sleep." Her eyes, sharp and bored, landed on Maya, who was refilling a guest's glass with sparkling water. "Hey, you," Elise called, her voice dripping with that teenage mix of cruelty and confidence. "What's your name again? Maya, right? You ever touch a piano, or do you just stick to cleaning?" The room chuckled, a ripple of amusement that felt like a slap. Charles grinned, catching the vibe. "Now, Elise, don't be mean," he said, but his tone was all show, no sincerity. "But that's not a bad idea. Maya, come here, kid. Let's see if you can do more than carry a tray." Maya froze, her heart thudding against her ribs. She glanced at Lena, who stood at the edge of the kitchen doorway, her face tight with that familiar mix of fear and resignation. Lena's eyes said, "Keep your head down, baby. Don't make waves." But Maya felt something else stirring, something she'd buried deep under years of yes sir and no ma'am. She set the tray on a side table, her movements slow and deliberate, and walked toward the Bosendorfer grand piano that dominated the corner of the room, a $300,000 beast that Charles bragged about but never played. The guests watched, their murmurs laced with condescension. "Oh, this'll be cute," a woman in a sequin dress whispered, her diamond earrings catching the light. "What's she gonna play, Twinkle Twinkle?" Another guest, a hedge fund bro with a Rolex, snorted into his martini. "I thought this was just another night," Maya told herself, her sneakers, old Nikes with frayed laces, squeaking faintly on the marble. Just another night of being invisible, of dodging the kind of comments that cut deeper than you let on. But something about the way Elise leaned forward, her phone already out, ready to record this for her TikTok followers, made Maya's stomach twist. Elise's caption was probably already written in her head. "Maid's kid tries to play piano, LOL." Charles clapped his hands, the sound sharp like a gunshot. "Come on, Maya, don't keep us waiting. Play something simple. Maybe Mary Had a Little Lamb. My guests could use a laugh." The room erupted in giggles, and Maya felt the heat creep up her neck, her fingers curling into fists before she forced them open. She wasn't new to this, the sneers, the assumptions that she was less because her mom scrubbed their floors. But tonight, it hit different. Tonight, it felt like a dare. She reached the piano, its ebony finish gleaming like it was daring her to touch it. She adjusted the bench, her movements precise, almost ritualistic. And for a split second, one guest, a retired music teacher named Mrs. Callahan, cocked her head, noticing the way Maya's hands hovered over the keys with a familiarity that didn't match her worn-out clothes. Nobody else caught it. They were too busy sipping their drinks, whispering bets about how quickly she'd crash and burn. Charles leaned back, his whiskey glass dangling, his smirk saying he'd already won this game. Elise zoomed in with her phone, her perfectly manicured nails tapping the screen. "This is gonna be gold," she muttered, loud enough for Maya to hear. Lena, still in the kitchen doorway, gripped the edge of a counter, her knuckles paling. She knew what Maya could do, knew the hours they'd spent in a Harlem community center, coaxing music from a beat-up upright piano. But she also knew the cost of stepping out of the shadows in a place like this. Maya sat, her back straight, her eyes fixed on the keys. I could play it safe, she thought, something easy, something that let them laugh and move on. But then she remembered Lena's voice, late at night in their cramped apartment, whispering over jazz records. "When they try to make you small, play big." She glanced at Charles, his smug grin like a challenge, and then at Elise, her phone a weapon aimed right at her. The room felt like it was closing in, the air thick with their expectations of her failure. But there was something else, too. A spark, a quiet fire that had been burning in her since she was 6, banging out chords in a drafty community center while Lena hummed Ella Fitzgerald. I didn't expect this moment to come so soon, Maya thought, her heart steadying. But if they want a show, I'll give them one they'll never forget. "May I pick the piece?" she asked, her voice soft but clear, cutting through the chatter. Charles waved a hand, magnanimous in his arrogance. "Sure, kid, whatever you know. We're here for fun, not a recital." The guests laughed again, but Mrs. Callahan leaned forward, her brow furrowing. Maya's fingers brushed the keys, and for a moment the room's noise faded. She thought of Lena, of the stories of smoky New Orleans clubs where her mom once played, of the dreams they'd tucked away in a city that didn't care. This wasn't just about her, it was about them. And as her hands settled into position, a hush fell, not out of respect, but out of curiosity, like they were all waiting for the punchline. Little did they know, the joke was about to be on them. The penthouse hummed with the kind of smug energy that only comes from people who've never had to worry about next month's rent. Maya Johnson sat at the Bosendorfer, its keys cool under her fingertips, the weight of a dozen pairs of eyes boring into her back. The guests' whispers felt like static, buzzing with mockery. "She's gonna butcher it," one said, while another muttered, "This is what happens when you let the help get ideas." Elise Harrington, phone still raised, zoomed in with a smirk, her perfectly curated TikTok feed about to get what she thought would be its viral crown jewel. Charles Harrington sipped his whiskey, his grin wide enough to show he was already savoring the cheap thrill of Maya's inevitable flop. But Maya wasn't hearing them, not really. Her mind was somewhere else. 6 years back, in a drafty Harlem community center where the air smelled of old wood and dreams that refused to die. That's where she first learned what it meant to play big. And tonight, with her mom's job and their whole fragile world on the line, she was wrestling with whether to stay small or let it all out. Back when Maya was 7, she'd trail Lena to the Harlem Harmony Center after school, a crumbling brick building wedged between a bodega and a laundromat. The center's upright piano was a beat-up Yamaha, its keys yellowed and some stuck, but to Maya, it was a portal. Lena, her mom, would sit beside her, her calloused hands guiding Maya's tiny fingers through scales while the radiator hissed in the corner. Lena wasn't just a housekeeper. She'd been a jazz pianist in New Orleans, playing smoky clubs on Frenchman Street, her name whispered among locals as the next big thing. But life had a way of breaking promises. Hurricane Katrina, a lost scholarship, a move to New York where her music degree meant nothing. Now she scrubbed penthouse floors and swallowed the kind of insults that made you feel like you were shrinking. But every night, after the Harringtons were asleep, Lena would hum Nina Simone tunes and teach Maya chord progressions on a cardboard keyboard they'd drawn on their kitchen table. "Music's the one place they can't take from you," Lena would say, her voice low like she was sharing a secret. "When they try to make you small, play big." Now, sitting at the Bosendorfer, Maya felt that lesson burning in her chest. She could play something safe. Mary Had a Little Lamb, like Charles suggested. Let them laugh, let them move on. It'd keep Lena's job safe, keep their rent paid, keep them invisible. But the way Elisa's phone glinted, the way Charles's laugh cut through her like a knife, it stirred something deeper. A quiet rage, not loud and wild, but sharp, focused, like the edge of a blade. Maya glanced at Lena, who stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, her hands twisting a dish towel so tight it looked like it might snap. Lena's eyes were a storm of fear and pride, pleading with Maya to stay safe, but knowing her daughter wasn't built to back down. Maya's heart pounded, but her hands were steady. She thought of the nights she'd practiced until her fingers ached, the mornings she'd walked to the center in the cold, her breath fogging as she played for nobody but herself and the ghosts of Lena's lost dreams. The guests were getting restless, their whispers turning to impatient huffs. "Come on, kid, don't waste our time," a man in a tailored blazer called out, his voice thick with entitlement. Elise leaned closer, her phone steady, already imagining the likes rolling in. "This is gonna be so bad, it's good," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Maya's jaw tightened, but she didn't flinch. She remembered Mr. Ellis, the janitor at the community center, who'd slip her granola bars and say, "You got fire, kid. Don't let nobody put it out." Mr. Ellis wasn't like the Harringtons. He'd grown up in Harlem, knew what it was to be counted out before you even started. Once, when Maya nailed a jazz riff Lena taught her, he'd clapped like she was on a stage, not a creaky floor. That memory hit her now, a tiny spark of defiance in a room full of people waiting for her to crash. "I didn't think it'd come to this," Maya told herself, her fingers hovering over the keys. Not here, not like this, with a crowd that saw her as a punchline. She could feel Lena's gaze, heavy with the weight of everything they'd carried, the late-night lessons, the pawn jewelry to buy sheet music, the way Lena would cry sometimes when she thought Maya was asleep, not out of sadness, but out of a fierce, stubborn hope. Maya knew what was at stake. If she played big, if she showed them who she really was, it could cost them everything. But if she didn't, if she let them laugh and walk away, it cost her something else, something she wasn't sure she could get back. Her eyes flicked to Mrs. Callahan, the retired music teacher, who was watching her with a curious tilt of her head, like she saw something the others didn't. That look, small as it was, felt like a lifeline, a reminder that not everyone in this room was against her. Charles cleared his throat, his voice dripping with fake patience. "Any day now, Maya. We're not here for a concert, just a little fun." The word fun landed like a jab, and the guests snickered, their glasses clinking like they were toasting to her failure. Elise adjusted her phone, muttering, "This better be worth my data." Maya's chest tightened, but she pushed it down, letting it fuel her instead of break her. She thought of Lena's voice, soft but unyielding, telling her about the time she played for a crowd that didn't want her there, how she turned their boos into silence. "You don't just play the notes," Lena had said, "you play your truth." Maya's fingers settled on the keys, her breath steadying. She wasn't just playing for herself tonight. She was playing for Lena, for Mr. Ellis, for every kid in Harlem who'd ever been told they didn't belong. "I didn't expect to be here," she thought, "but if they want a show, I'm going to give them one they'll never forget." Her hands moved, poised for the first note, and the room's chatter faded, not out of respect, but because they were ready to laugh. Little did they know, the laugh was about to be on them. The air in the Manhattan high-rise felt thick, not with heat, but with the kind of smug anticipation that comes when rich folks think they're about to get a good laugh. Maya Johnson sat at the Bosendorfer Grand, its polished ebony surface catching the chandelier's glow like a mirror to the room's arrogance. The keys under her fingers were cool, solid, a lifeline in a sea of whispers and smirks. Charles Harrington, sprawled on his velvet sofa, swirled his whiskey, his grin sharp enough to cut glass. He was already picturing the story he'd tell at his next board meeting, how he let the Maid's kid play his $300,000 piano for kicks. Elise, his 16-year-old daughter, angled her phone for the perfect shot, her TikTok followers about to feast on what she thought would be Maya's humiliation. "This is gonna break the internet," she muttered, her voice dripping with that teenage mix of cruelty and clout chasing. The guests, hedge fund bros, socialites, and tech moguls, leaned in, their murmurs a low buzz of bets and giggles. $5 she freezes up, one said. "Nah, she'll bang out something awful first," another chuckled, his Rolex glinting as he raised his martini. But Maya wasn't listening to them. Her mind was locked on the music, on the years she'd spent in a Harlem community center, coaxing magic from a beat-up Yamaha, while her mom, Lena, whispered jazz chords like they were prayers. Maya's heart pounded, but her hands didn't shake. She'd made her choice. Play big, like Lena always said, even if it meant risking everything. She thought of the nights she'd practiced until her fingers cramped, the mornings she'd slipped into the Harmony Center before school, the way Mr. Ellis, the janitor, would nod like she was already somebody. "I didn't think it happened like this," she told herself, her breath steadying. Not in front of these people, with their diamond earrings and their sneers, who looked at her like she was nothing more than the helps kid. But something about the way Elise's phone glinted, the way Charles's laugh grated like sandpaper, lit a fire in her chest. She glanced at Lena, standing rigid in the kitchen doorway, her dish towel twisted so tight it looked like it might tear. Lena's eyes were a storm, fear for their future, pride for her daughter, and something fiercer, like she was daring Maya to show them who she was. Mrs. Callahan, the retired music teacher, watched from the edge of the crowd, her brow furrowed like she sensed something the others didn't. That tiny spark of recognition was enough to push Maya forward. The first notes of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata spilled from the piano, soft and haunting, like a whisper that demanded silence. The room froze. Charles's smirk faltered, his glass pausing mid-swirl. Elise's phone wavered, her thumb hovering over the record button as if she wasn't sure what she was capturing anymore. The guests' giggles died in their throats, replaced by a stunned hush. Maya's fingers moved with a precision that didn't belong to a 13-year-old in frayed Nikes, each note deliberate, pulling the melody from the shadows of the penthouse. It wasn't just technical, it had soul, the kind of depth that made you feel something you didn't expect. She wasn't playing for them, she was playing for Lena, for the nights they'd spent mapping out chords on a cardboard keyboard, for the dreams Lena had buried when she traded her piano for a mop. The music built, its somber waves crashing against the room's arrogance, and for the first time, the guests weren't laughing. They were listening. Then, without a pause, Maya shifted gears. The final notes of Beethoven faded, and she launched into something new. Unseen Rhapsody, a piece she'd written in stolen moments at the community center, weaving Lena's jazz roots with classical fire. The melody started low, like the hum of a New Orleans club at midnight, then surged with intricate runs that echoed the pulse of Harlem's streets. It was their story, Lena's lost gigs, Maya's quiet defiance, the way they'd carved out a world where no one could touch them. The guests' jaws dropped, their glasses forgotten in their hands. A woman in a sequined dress dabbed at her eyes, caught off guard by the ache in the music. The hedge fund bro who'd bet on her failure stared like he'd been slapped. Elise's phone sank lower, her smirk gone, replaced by a flicker of something like envy. She'd wanted a viral flop, but this was something else. Charles shifted in his seat, his whiskey untouched now. He'd expected a joke, not a reckoning. His eyes darted to the crowd, searching for someone to share his unease, but no one met his gaze. They were all caught in Maya's spell, her small hands dancing across the keys with a confidence that made the room feel smaller. Then the door opened, and Amara Tate, a Grammy-winning music producer with a reputation for spotting raw talent, slipped in late, her leather jacket a stark contrast to the room's glitz. She froze in the foyer, her breath catching as Unseen Rhapsody hit a crescendo. Amara had heard the world's best in studios from LA to London, but this, a 13-year-old in a borrowed uniform, playing like she was born for it, stopped her cold. She pulled out her phone, not to mock, but to record, her fingers moving fast as she typed, "A prodigy, hidden in plain sight." Maya felt the shift in the room, the way the air went from mocking to mesmerized. She didn't look up, didn't need to. She could feel Lena's pride radiating from the kitchen, could sense Mrs. Callahan's quiet nod, could hear Mr. Ellis's voice in her head. "You got fire, kid." The music swelled, jazz harmonies tangling with classical precision, telling a story of pain and hope that these people could never fully understand. When she hit the final chord, a single, resonant note that hung in the air like a challenge, the room was dead silent. Not the silence of boredom, but the kind that comes when you realize you've misjudged everything. Maya looked up, her eyes locking on Charles. "That was for my mom," she said, her voice steady, cutting through the stillness. "She taught me everything." Amara stepped forward, her phone still recording, her eyes blazing with something like awe. "Charles," she said, her voice low but urgent, "who is this girl?" Charles stammered, his face pale. "She's just the maid's kid." His voice cracked, and for the first time, he looked small, like the king of the skyline had just been knocked off his throne. Elise lowered her phone, her face a mix of shock and dread. The video she'd planned to post for laughs was now a testament to her own arrogance, and she knew it. The guests didn't clap, not yet. They were too stunned, too busy grappling with the fact that the girl they'd laughed at had just rewritten the rules of the room. Amara's fingers flew across her phone, posting the clip with a hashtag that would soon light up the internet, #UnseenProdigy. Maya sat still, her hands resting on the keys, her heart racing, but her face calm. "I didn't expect it to feel like this," she thought, "but damn, it feels good to be seen." The morning after Maya's performance, New York City woke up to a firestorm that didn't need a match to spread. Amara Tate's video of a 13-year-old in a borrowed uniform turning a billionaire's penthouse silent with her piano mastery was everywhere. Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, even the morning news. The hashtag #UnseenProdigy racked up 20 million views by noon, with comments slicing through Charles Harrington's polished image like a hot knife. "Imagine mocking a kid like that and getting owned," one tweet read. "This is what happens when you think money buys brains," another jabbed. Maya Johnson, the girl they'd laughed at, was now a name people couldn't stop talking about, and the Harringtons were learning the hard way that the internet doesn't forget. In their cramped Harlem apartment, Maya and Lena sat at their wobbly kitchen table, the one where they'd drawn a cardboard keyboard years ago, staring at a laptop screen that glowed with notifications. Lena's hands, still rough from years of cleaning, trembled as she scrolled through messages from strangers calling Maya a genius, a hero, a kid who'd flipped the script on a room full of snobs. Maya just sat there, her old Nikes tapping the floor, feeling like she'd woken up in someone else's life. "I didn't think it'd blow up like this," she thought, her heart caught between pride and a quiet fear of what came next. Charles Harrington's world, meanwhile, was crumbling faster than a bad real estate deal. By mid-morning, 2 investors pulled out of his latest skyscraper project, citing reputational risks. The New York Post ran a headline that stung worse than the loss. "Billionaire's blunder, mocks Maid's kid, discovers prodigy." Charles sat in his office, the Manhattan skyline mocking him through the window, his phone buzzing with calls he didn't want to answer. He'd hired a crisis PR firm, but even they couldn't spin this one. Amara's video showed him smirking, sipping whiskey while Maya played her heart out, and the contrast was damning. He'd wanted a laugh, a quick ego boost for his guests, but now he was the punchline. His gut churned with something he hadn't felt in years: shame. Not the kind that makes you apologize, but the kind that makes you realize you've been blind to your own arrogance. He kept replaying Maya's final words, "That was for my mom," and the way her eyes locked on his, not angry, just steady, like she saw right through him. He'd underestimated her, and it wasn't just embarrassing, it was expensive. Elise was falling apart in her own way. She'd deleted her TikTok account by breakfast, but not before screenshots of her video, the one meant to mock Maya, spread like wildfire. The comments were brutal. Privileged brat thought she'd get clout, got humbled instead. Years of piano lessons and she got smoked by a maid's kid. Elise locked herself in her room, her phone a landmine of notifications she couldn't face. She'd spent years curating her image as the perfect influencer. Private school polish, designer clothes, a life that screamed, "better than you." Now that image was shattered, and the worst part was knowing she'd done it to herself. She kept seeing Maya's hands on the keys, moving with a grace she'd never mastered despite thousands spent on tutors. It wasn't just jealousy, it was the sick realization that she'd been cruel for no reason, and the world had seen it. Her friends, usually quick to hype her posts, went silent, leaving her alone with the weight of her own choices. Back in Harlem, Maya and Lena were navigating a different kind of chaos. Amara Tate showed up at their apartment unannounced, her leather jacket and no-nonsense vibe a stark contrast to the Harringtons' world. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Maya, you're the real deal," she said, her voice firm but warm. "I've got connections at the New York Philharmonic. Lena, they want you to guest conduct. And Maya, Juilliard's offering a full ride, room, board, everything." Lena's eyes welled up, not from sadness, but from a pride so fierce it hurt. She'd spent years hiding her past as a jazz pianist, her dreams buried under the Harringtons' floors. Now her daughter's talent was pulling them both into the light. Maya, though, felt a knot in her stomach. "I thought I just wanted to prove them wrong," she admitted to herself, but this was bigger than revenge. It was a chance to build something new, something theirs. They packed up their few belongings, leaving the Harrington service for good, and moved to a modest but bright apartment in Brooklyn, where the walls didn't carry the weight of being invisible. The ripple effects didn't stop there. Mrs. Callahan, the retired music teacher who'd watched Maya with quiet recognition, reached out to Amara. She'd taught at a Harlem school for decades, seen kids like Maya overlooked because of where they came from. "I knew she had it," she told Amara, her voice crackling with conviction. "That girl's got a fire you can't teach." Mrs. Callahan started a fundraiser at the Harlem Harmony Center, channeling the viral buzz into a scholarship for kids who couldn't afford music lessons. The community rallied, local bodegas and churches chipping in, turning Maya's moment into something bigger than one night. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every kid who'd been told they didn't belong. Charles showed up at Maya and Lita's new apartment a week later, his tailored suit looking out of place in their modest building. He stood in the doorway, clutching a bouquet of flowers that screamed PR move. "I didn't know," he said, his voice low, like he was trying to convince himself as much as them. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." Lena looked at him, her face a mask of calm she'd perfected over years of swallowing insults. "You didn't know because you didn't care to," she said, her New Orleans drawl sharp with truth. Maya stood beside her, her arms crossed, her old Nikes scuffed but steady. "We don't need your flowers, Mr. Harrington," she said, her voice not angry, just done. "We've got our music." Charles flinched, the weight of his mistake settling in. He'd thought he could fix this with a gesture, but the door closing in his face told him some things can't be bought back. The fallout reshaped their world in ways Maya hadn't imagined. Lena dug out her old jazz records, playing them loud in their new apartment, her laughter filling the space where silence used to live. Maya started sketching new compositions, her pencil scratching out notes that felt like freedom. The internet kept buzzing, but now it was about hope, not humiliation. Stories of kids inspired by Maya, of communities rallying to lift up their own. Charles, meanwhile, watched his empire shrink, his boardroom quieter as partners distanced themselves. Elise stayed offline, her confidence cracked, her privilege no longer a shield. Maya didn't hate them. She didn't have the energy for that. She was too busy building something new, something that felt like home. I never thought one song could change everything, she mused, her fingers tracing the keys of a secondhand piano in their Brooklyn living room. But damn, it did.
6 months later, Carnegie Hall was alive with a buzz that felt like electricity, the kind you get when a crowd knows they're witnessing something bigger than a concert. The velvet seats were packed, from music nerds to Harlem locals who'd scraped together ticket money, all there to see a 13-year-old girl who turned a billionaire sneer into a symphony. Maya Johnson sat at the grand piano center stage, her hands steady, her old Nike swapped for polished black flats that still felt a little foreign. The spotlight caught the edges of her face, her eyes calm but fierce, like she was carrying a whole world inside her. Lena stood at the conductor's podium, her black dress elegant but unpretentious, her hands raised to lead a youth orchestra filled with kids who looked like they could have been Maya's neighbors. The program listed Unseen Rhapsody, Maya's composition, the one that had set the internet ablaze with #UnseenProdigy. And tonight, it wasn't just a performance, it was a statement. Maya glanced at the audience, her heart thumping but her mind clear. I never thought I'd be here, she thought, not in a million years, not after all those nights practicing on a cardboard keyboard. But here she was, and it felt like she was finally home. The orchestra strings hummed to life, and Maya's fingers hit the keys, Unseen Rhapsody unfolding like a story told in whispers and shouts. The melody wove Lena's New Orleans jazz roots with classical fire, each note carrying the weight of their journey, years of being invisible, of Lena's dreams buried under penthouse floors, of Maya's quiet defiance in a Harlem community center. The audience leaned forward, some closing their eyes, others gripping their programs, caught in the music's raw honesty. It wasn't just beautiful, it was alive, like it could reach into your chest and pull out something you didn't know was there. Lena conducted with a grace she hadn't shown in years, her movements fluid, like she was dancing with the music she'd once thought lost forever. Amara Tate sat in the front row, her leather jacket swapped for a sleek blazer, her eyes shining with pride as she watched the girl she'd discovered. Mrs. Callahan, the retired music teacher who'd seen Maya's spark that night in the penthouse, was there too, her hands clasped tight, nodding like she'd known all along this moment was coming. In the back, in a cheap seat he'd barely managed to afford, sat Charles Harrington. His suit was still tailored, but it hung looser now, like he'd lost more than just money in the past 6 months. His empire was crumbling, 5 million deals gone, investors bailing, his name a punchline in boardrooms and on X. The Post had called him the billionaire who mocked a prodigy, and the label stuck like gum on a shoe. He'd tried to sue Amara for defamation, but her video was airtight, showing his smirk as Maya played her heart out. His wife had left him, tired of the headlines, and Elise was still in therapy, her influencer dream shattered by her own cruelty. Charles didn't clap with the crowd. He just stared at the stage, his jaw tight, replaying that night when he thought Maya was a joke. He'd wanted to impress his friends, to flex his power, but now he was the one diminished, a man who'd built skyscrapers but couldn't see the talent right in front of him. Part of him wanted to hate Maya, to blame her for his downfall, but deep down he knew he'd done this to himself. It wasn't just regret, it was the sinking realization that he'd been blind and the world had seen it.
Maya didn't see Charles, didn't need to. Her focus was on the music, on Lena, on the kids in the orchestra who reminded her of herself. Kids from Bed-Stuy and the Bronx playing instruments donated by the fundraiser Mrs. Callahan had started. The concert was raising $3 million for music scholarships, a lifeline for kids who'd never get a shot otherwise. Maya had insisted it be free for Harlem residents, a nod to the community that held her up when no one else did. As Unseen Rhapsody hit its final movement, a jazz-infused crescendo that felt like a heartbeat, Maya thought of Mr. Ellis, the Harmony Center janitor who'd slipped her granola bars and called her fire. He'd passed away a month ago, but she dedicated the performance to him, whispering his name before the first note. The music swelled, carrying their story. Lena's lost gigs, Maya's stolen practice hours, the stubborn hope that kept them going. When the final chord rang out, the hall erupted, a standing ovation that shook the rafters. Lena lowered her baton, her eyes wet, and crossed the stage to pull Maya into a hug that said everything words couldn't. Maya stepped to the microphone, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "This is for everyone who's ever been unseen," she said, her words echoing through the hall. "For the kids who practice in basements, for the parents who give up everything so we can dream. You're not invisible. You're unstoppable." The crowd roared, some wiping tears, others shouting her name. Lena stood beside her, her hand on Maya's shoulder, her face glowing with a pride that had been buried too long. Amara was already tweeting, her post reading, "Maya Johnson just changed the game. #Unseen Prodigy Forever." Back in Brooklyn, their new apartment was filled with secondhand furniture and a piano Maya had bought with her first recording contract. She was a Juilliard student now, sketching new compositions that mixed jazz and classical, telling stories of people like her and Lena. The scholarship fund was growing, with bodegas and churches still chipping in, turning her moment into a movement. Charles watched from the shadows, his hands empty, his life a shadow of what it had been. He didn't clap, didn't cheer, just sat there, letting Maya's words sink in. He'd tried to use her as a prop, a way to flex his status, but she'd turned it around, showing the world what real power looked like. It wasn't about money or skyscrapers, it was about heart, about building something that lasted. "I thought I was untouchable," he admitted to himself, "but I was wrong." Maya and Lena didn't need his world anymore. They'd built their own. As the crowd filed out, buzzing with awe, Maya sat back at the piano, her fingers tracing a new melody, one she hadn't named yet. "This one's for us," she whispered, her voice soft but sure. The city stretched out beyond the hall, alive with possibility, and for the first time, Maya felt like it was hers too. "Damn," she thought, "if this is what being seen feels like, I'm never going back." The story of Maya Johnson teaches us that true worth lies not in wealth or status, but in the courage to rise above prejudice and let your talent shine. It's a reminder that the world often judges us by our appearance or background, but those judgments are shallow, and resilience can turn them to dust. Like the American saying goes, "Don't judge a book by its cover." Maya's brilliance, hidden behind her worn Nikes and her mother's housekeeper uniform, shattered the arrogance of those who underestimated her. This story urges us to confront injustice, to speak our truth even when it's risky, and to honor the unseen strength in ourselves and others. It's about breaking free from toxic silence and recognizing that everyone, no matter their roots, carries a spark worth celebrating. For Vietnamese audiences, young and old, it's a call to reflect on our own biases, to lift up those around us, and to find pride in our unique journeys. Share your thoughts or stories in the comments, hit like to support, and subscribe for more inspiring tales that challenge and uplift. Here's to finding peace in our own strength and hope in every new day.